Is that you, Emily?
Yep, sorry. There we go. I was having some technical problems. Hi, Ed.
Hi, Emily. How are you doing? You're very welcome to Dublin. When was the last time you were in Dublin?
Oh, when was the last time I was in Dublin? I think it was probably 2018 or 19. Well, I've only been there once, and I was like for 16 hours, so I can't really say. It was very, very long.
Okay. Well,
managed to get a pint of Guinness, which was the most Irish I got, but apart from that, not much experience in Ireland. So it's in my to-do list.
Yeah, well, usually in 16 hours, you'd get more than 1 pint of Guinness in. So whoever was looking after you wasn't doing a very good job, I would say. Well, listen, you're very welcome.
I agree.
You're very welcome, and we're delighted to have you here to chat and talk through some of these really amazing wines. I'm delighted to see we've got lots of people joining us. Yeah, so you're all very welcome as well, one and all. So a little introduction, Emily, you're the head winemaker for Viña Carmen in Chile. You have just finished your harvest, which I believe was a very long harvest, and you're now making wine like a good thing. The fermentations are still going on, and you know it's the busiest time of year for you at the moment. So we really appreciate you taking time out from your busy schedule to come and join us.
No, it's a pleasure to be here. It's good. Winemaking always has very, very marked and different times in the year, and now that we're going into winter, things are starting to slow down and be a bit more calm. We have time to taste the wines and decide what we're going to do with each block. We have a very long harvest, as you said, because Chile being very long and thin, and us making wines in different places of Chile, we start picking very early in the north, and here further south, the ripeness arrives later. So it's fun to make wines from different regions in Chile, but it makes it a very long season. So now it's nice to start the autumn and start calming down and seeing the results of this 2021 that has been very good, very pleasantly surprised with the qualities. And so I think it's going to be a good one.
Good, great, excellent. Just to say to everyone at home, don't be shy in asking questions. Unmute yourself and ask a question, or use the chat function as well. You know, we're here to chat with you as well as each other, and I think it's lovely now that we're all so well versed in using Zoom and the internet, that we're able to do things like this and talk with winemakers who are in the middle of making their vintage. So you touched on the fact that it's a very long process in Chile, and that winemakers who are used to making wine, say in Bordeaux or in Rioja, are not used to having a harvest of this kind of length. They're used to going into the vineyards for a couple of weeks and then it's all done. Whereas your harvest lasted for what, 3 months?
Yes, so we started at the end of January and finished a couple of weeks ago. So
yeah. So that is, yeah, so that is a long harvest, and for people who are not used to it, it's very funny. We, as non-winemakers and non-wine people, we have this wonderful idea of what it is like to be a winemaker, and you know, how many people have thought, you know, wouldn't it be really nice to retire to Tuscany or Bordeaux or Burgundy or Chile, or, you know, pick a country that's beautiful and that grows grapes, and I'll grow grapes and we do a bit of work around the harvest and then spend the rest of the year just drinking fine wine and putting our feet up. But it's not like that at all. It really is 24/7, 365 days a year, I would imagine.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it's 24/7. The thing is that we have so many different things going on at the different times of year. So yeah, it is. it is quite a hands-on. When I decided to become a winemaker, I really didn't have a clue what I was going to be doing professionally. Here in Chile, you have to study agronomy to become a winemaker. So you study 5 years, pretty long. University in Chile is quite long in general. And then you specialize in whatever. It can be crops, viticulture, enology, etc. I went to viticulture and enology because I went into agronomy thinking I wanted to be a winemaker because I liked drinking wine. So it's not because I come from a vineyard family or because I don't know, grew up in a wine region. I grew up in the south of Chile that has practically no wine at all. And as you say, what does a winemaker do? I didn't have a clue. And the fact that we study agronomy means it has an agronomic part that is very important. Why? Because the sourcing of the fruit is so relevant in terms of the quality and the type of wine that you can produce. I didn't have a clue about that until I started working, and today most of the wine is made outside of harvest, you know, the growing season, the soil, the irrigation, the management of the vines. That is what really is going to design the wine, and also the choosing or selecting the different parcels to design the wine from the vineyard, instead of only, like, people think we sort of sit around with a glass and mix up all the wines together, but it's actually all the hard work is done before. So that is why now that we finish harvest is sort of the most calm time of the year, because the vines are going into dormants because of winter, and everything picks up in spring. So now we have the pruning, which is very important, but then in spring everything starts getting a little bit more hectic. So I would say 70% of the job of a winemaker is in the vineyard.
Yeah, I mean, they do say that great wine is grown and not made. You know, if you have to do too much work in the winery after the harvest, that means there's been a problem in the vineyard earlier on. And you know, it's like anything creative, that if you have to fix something that's not right, you know, you're much better off to have a better basis to start from. So all the work that you've done up to this point is what's going to pay the rewards for you. But this year has been a La Nina year, hasn't it? So it means that the climatic conditions have been slightly different.
Well, actually, this year has been cooler, as you say, and we even had an event of rain in the summer, which is very rare for Chile. So I don't know if it's La Nina or climate change. At this stage, everything to do with climate is so unstable. We talk about historical averages, but historical averages compared to of the last 10 years have shifted in terms of rainfall, frost events, heat waves, cooler seasons. So it's difficult to relate or put together different factors. I think there is an important factor of climate change.
Mm. And are we going to see
everywhere, and Chile is not the exception?
Yeah. Are we going to see changes in the grapes that you grow and how you grow the grapes and the wines that you make to compensate for climate change? Or because I know we've seen in Bordeaux that they've just introduced a whole load of new grapes that they're allowed to grow in Bordeaux, which are warmer climate, but I don't know if we'll see anything like that in Chile.
There are things that are coming up, but yes, and also the borders of the viticulture regions are moving south. So I said I grew up in the south and no vineyards existed. Today, 20 years after I left, there is around 200 hectares planted of vineyards where I grew up. So the region is moving south. So we have the Atacama Desert in the north, and the desert is sort of moving fast towards sort of closer to Santiago. Santiago used to have an average rainfall of around 300 millimeters. I don't know if you talk in millimeters or not. Are you metric? Yes.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah, we can be.
We had around 300 millimeters of rain a year, and we've had seasons like last year was around 70 millimeters. So it was almost practically a desert in Santiago. So all of that is changing the way we manage the vineyards in terms of irrigation, what grape varieties we're planting, plant material, sort of rootstocks that are more resistant to drought, and also moving towards the south, which is something that is happening big time.
Because I know that sustainability is very, very important. I mean, the winery, Viña Carmen, is certified as being sustainable. And so how that works in terms of rainfall and, you know, if the desert is moving south, you know, how sustainable is it?
Well, exactly. So sustainability is, I'm sure everybody is pretty much familiar with the concept, but we want to be friendly with the environment, but also friendly and incorporate the community, and that works in the business, and also for the business to be sustainable through time. So economically viable. I mean, not only be sort of green, but also everything is connected. If we are friendly with the environment, the people working with us are happier working that way, and also ensure a source or an economic source for their work, and the business can keep on living through time. So all of these things of where we plant, how we plant, what we produce are all connected with this concept of sustainability. So it's a very sort of, it integrates three very important things to keep the business going in a healthy and sustainable way through time.
Yeah, okay.
I'm sure everybody's getting very thirsty with all this talk.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I know I'm getting very thirsty, and I hope everyone hasn't been waiting for us to stop talking before they start tasting the wines or drinking the wines even. There is a subtle difference between tasting and drinking. I know in my work life as a sommelier in restaurants.
Exactly. Well, I forget that for you it's the perfect time to start drinking, but here in Chile it's around 2:30 in the afternoon. So I'm gonna watch and see how you drink and taste at the same time and enjoy the wines.
Oh no,
it's gonna be an
I'm not tasting.
I'm drinking. Wines.
Yeah.
Good. Glad.
Well, listen.
All of you should.
This first wine, has anyone had a little taste of it yet? And what does anyone think of it so far? And I'd love you to tell us a little bit about this.
I would like to show a small presentation, Ed, if you...
Yeah, lovely.
Are you the host?
Yeah, but you could
enable me to...
You should be enabled to share your screen already. If you look at the bottom of this... No?
Host disabled participant screen sharing.
Host disabled it? Oh, I thought I had enabled it. Let me just have a little look here.
No, it's not working. Well.
There we go. Should be working now.
Yeah. Now, yes. Okay. So just a very small presentation, just to get everybody in tune with the map. We talked about the Atacama Desert up north. Well, this is Chile, very long and thin country, over 4,000 kilometers from north to south. And surrounded by these natural barriers, the Andes in the east, which separate us from Argentina, that is around here. This is a very typical picture of what Santiago looks like in June when it rains, and we have the Andes, which are probably somebody who is connected has been to Santiago in the winter, and you can understand, relate to how amazing these mountains are. And the Pacific Ocean in the west, which is a very cold sea because it comes from the south where we have the Antarctic, and the Humboldt Current is a very cold current that comes up towards the north. So it's a very cold sea. That's why we have very good seafood. Chile is very well known for our seafood, and also the climate close to the coast is very cool and very good for the production of cool climate grape varieties. And the Atacama Desert in the north, which is the driest desert in the world. And so this gives us a great diversity to produce grapes in very short distances. So what you see on this map is the central part of Chile. So where the Cabernet Sauvignon is grown is Maipo, close to Santiago, the capital, so in the middle of Chile. And if we go a little bit towards the coast, we get to the cool climate regions like Casablanca, Lleida, where we're producing grapes like Chardonnay and Sauvignon Blanc, which we're going to taste. And also, we're going to taste a wine that comes from Colchagua, which is further south, where the Carmener is. And we'll talk about it when we get to the wine. Otherwise, I don't want to give you too much technical information. Otherwise, it gets a little bit boring. So Casablanca is the first wine that you're drinking. It comes from Casablanca. Casablanca is a wine region that is around 45 minutes from Santiago. And only in that short distance, we change completely the climate because the impact of the Pacific Ocean is quite important. So the climate is cooler. We have a lot of morning fog. And you're tasting the Sauvignon Blanc 2017, which is a very fresh and fruit-driven wine at the same time. When Casablanca was, we started planting in Chile and Casablanca around the 90s. It was like a big innovation to produce grapes in this cool climate. Today, we've gone even more extreme, producing Sauvignon Blanc in Lleida, for example, which is right on top of the Pacific Ocean, like 9 kilometers away. So the style between Casablanca and Lleida, for example, are very different. We're tasting Casablanca. Casablanca is 30 kilometers away from the coast. So you have an impact of the Pacific Ocean, but it's not like a direct impact. So we also find very typical flavors of citric aromas like lemon, lime, also some fruit like peach, grapefruit, also on the citric side, but also a little bit tropical sometimes, but keeping a lot of freshness in the palate, okay? So we always think of Sauvignon Blanc that has to be drunk the year of the vintage. But we're tasting a 2017. We work at Sauvignon Blanc to be able to get creaminess in the palate. We work a lot with the lees, with the fine lees after fermentation and during fermentation, moving them and getting them round and getting some texture. And also we work with different types of fermentation. So we do stainless steel fermentation, temperature control that promotes a lot of aromatics, but also we work with barrels. So we ferment part of the Sauvignon Blanc in French oak barrels. And that gives a lot of texture and mouthfeel. And then we blend. So we also work with different types of clones, which means different plant material. So they're all Sauvignon Blanc, but some are more fruit-driven, some are more herbal-driven, and that then we blend the different components. And the result is what you're tasting now. This is a pitch. Whoops. A picture of the Casablanca vineyard, where we're surrounded by these small hills, but the vineyards are planted, the Sauvignon Blanc is planted on the flat.
I have to say, I find that absolutely delicious, the freshness and the balance of the fruit and the acidity, which is just so mouth-watering, but it's not aggressive. And I think that's probably to do with the as you explained, the working with the lees and Sometimes Sauvignon Blanc.
There's a good comment here that says, lovely wine, a slight salinity to it. I totally agree. There's that touch of salinity, which is quite typical to, I sort of associate it to a kind of minerality, and it's very typical of these cool climates.
Yeah, delicious.
Black currant leaf character. I wonder if that is about the reds or.
No, that was me. I said I get that slightly, you know, if you get crushed black currant leaves, you get that slight kind of herbaceous, like nettly kind of characteristic. It's not overpowering, but
yes,
it's there in the background, if you know what I mean. Which I love.
I know what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's from Casablanca. I mentioned Lleida because it's another famous wine region, but this is a Casablanca. So Casablanca, what I really wanted to explain when I commented both regions is that Casablanca is about 30 kilometers away from the coast. So you have an impact in the climate, but it's not a direct impact. So it's normally Casablanca is a little bit more fruit driven. And Lleida, this just, well, unfortunately you don't have a wine from Lleida, but it just in terms of regions, it's interesting to understand that it's right on top of the Pacific Ocean, and it's more like a New Zealand character. So more herbal, more grassy type of Sauvignon Blanc. So they're very, very different. And I wanted to point it out because so that you understand how regionality is so important, and the impact of the Pacific Ocean on the character of these cool climate varieties. Does it? Our bottle says DO Lleida.
Yeah.
2017. I'm sorry. We changed to Casablanca in 2018, which was the first harvest I did. I'm sorry. You're right. So this should be more towards like the grassier character. I'm sorry. Good point. Thank you for pointing out, Alexander. That was the last year that was made from Lleida. And I'll tell you why. Because we used to source our fruit from a grower in Lleida. And when I arrived in 2017, but after harvest. And Gran Reserva is all about us growing our own vineyards for certain grape varieties. So we decided to go back to Casablanca, where originally Gran Reserva was made. So in the 90s, Gran Reserva Sauvignon Blanc was from Casablanca. And then there was this big trend of Lleida being sort of more extreme, cooler climate, etc. And so Carmen started working with Lleida, with this grower. But in my mind, I think Casablanca has a very good character in terms of fruit, and also for us, it's important to manage our vineyard. So we wanted to go back to our own vineyard where originally it had been made. So sorry for that confusion, because I forgot. That was the other change. So shall we move on to the next wine, Ed? Or
yeah. Let's. I've whetted my appetite now with the Sauvignon Blanc. So I'm ready to move on to something red. I'm really looking forward to these, actually. I've been a big fan.
It's actually quite lucky that you're tasting 2014. So two quite aged Gran Reservas. The case of the Carmenere and the Cabernet Sauvignon that we're going to taste. We're going to taste first the Carmenere. I would rather we do that order. Do you see the presentation, or do you see the window in my chat open?
I can see you chatting, and I see your Colchagua, Apalta in Colchagua.
But you don't see the box of the group chat because I have that open. Okay, just in case I'll minimize. No, I don't know when you share screen how much you see. Anyway, So Colchagua, we're going to taste Carmener first. I would like to taste this first. And tell you a little bit the story about this grape variety. This grape variety is very important for Chile and has a very close relationship with Carmen, with us, with the winery. A lot of you probably already know the story about Carmener, but I'll repeat it for those who don't. Carmener is a red grape variety originally from Bordeaux that disappeared in Bordeaux in the late 1800s because of phylloxera, this pest that vanished most of the vineyards in Europe. And they never replanted in Bordeaux, in my opinion, because the climate wasn't the right climate for this grape variety. And also, it's very difficult to produce Carmener. It needs a lot of heat. This we know today. So they never replanted in Bordeaux, and Carmener in France practically doesn't exist. Very small plantations. And in Chile, French grape varieties arrived around 1850. And we didn't know we had Carmener. It was never registered as Carmener. It came in mixed up with Merlot. And Merlot and Carmener look quite alike at the beginning of the season. They look quite different at the end of the season. But many of the vineyards planted in early 1900s until 1994, believe it or not, were Merlot vineyards mixed up with Carmener. And it was in one of the vineyards of Carmen that an ampelographer from France, ampelographer is a science that studies how the different grape varieties look like, identified that what a block that he was told was Merlot was actually Carmener. And that is when Carmen decided in 1996 to come out with the first Carmener on the label. At the beginning, it was like, how come we've made this big mistake? Merlot was a big boom. Everybody was sort of talking about the Chile Merlot and wanted to drink Chile Merlot. So changing to Carmener was a big risk commercially, because we thought we were going to lose so many sales of Merlot, changing the name to Carmener. So it was a big sort of leap at that time. And then a lot of people started following. De Martino, for example, another winery that came out in the same year with a label of Carmener. And then on and on, Chile started to be one of the biggest and the most important producer of this grape variety. But with this great excitement that we had this lost grape variety, we started coming out with Carmeners that weren't really that great, because we started understanding that it's not quite similar to Merlot. They're quite different. They have very different requirements in terms of climate and also management and irrigation management and picking dates, most importantly, picking dates. So Carmener was rediscovered in Maipo, which is close to Santiago, where most of the Cabernet Sauvignons come from today, or the best Cabernet Sauvignon comes from today. But then we started realizing that actually the Carmener needs more heat, more exposure to the sun, more restraining soils, and that's why we moved to Apalta, Colchagua. And this slide is about the Carmener from Colchagua. And the typical flavors of Carmener is a very easy to identify grape variety, because it's very herbal. It has a lot of green pepper. It has spices, and it's very silky in tannins, and very driven towards black fruit, and also some red fruit, fresh. Depends on the picking date. So that's why we moved regions to Apalta and started managing this grape variety. And today we went through a phase that the producers and winemakers weren't really quite sure how to make Carmener. But today, in the last 15 years, I think it's pretty consistent in terms of quality, and it's a very unique wine. You know, it has a lot of character, a lot of tobacco leaf, chocolate, very complex, very Chilean wine, even though it's a French grape variety, and quite interesting. So yes.
So Paul T has asked, what is the blend mix of Carmen de Lanz Alto Rajuel Estate Blend 2018? Lovely wines tonight, thanks.
Well, that is a completely different wine. It's a wine that we started making. Carmen de Lanz is the question. It's popped up in the chat. It's a blend that comes from Maipo. We're going to talk about Maipo on the next slide, because the next wine comes from Maipo, from the vineyard Alto Rajuel. And the blend, the mix is, the heart of that wine is Cabernet Sauvignon. 76% is Cabernet Sauvignon, and it has a bit of Cabernet Franc, Petit Syrah, and Petit Verdot. I love that wine. It's great. So I'm glad you've tasted it and that you have it in your radar, because it's a very new wine. We started making it in 2018. And
it hasn't actually made it to Ireland yet.
Yeah, so I wonder how Paul got that bottle.
I don't know where Paul T got it, but I have some ordered, so it should be here middle of June, I'm hoping, middle to the end of June. So we'll be able to try it then. But can I just ask, this Carmenere, the 2014 Carmenere, I see that it's got a little bit of Carignan in there and a little bit of Petit Verdot as well. And I've just wanted to ask you what that brings to the wine in your opinion.
Well, Carignan is a grape variety that has very high acidity, and Carmenere, and also Petit Verdot, very good acidity. And Carmenere is a grape variety that normally has very low acidity, so it brings a lot of brightness to the blend. The percentages are very low, so just a touch. And also the Petit Verdot gives a lot of like backbone to the wine in the mid palate. Petit Verdot is a very sort of fleshy wine, so it gives a lot of mid palate and structure. Carmenere is very silky, very soft in tannin. So these grape varieties in small portions help. Normally now we're working 100% Carmenere, but these older vintages have small touches of these other grape varieties.
And I would imagine that might be what has helped the wine to age so gracefully, because it has, I think it's aged really beautifully. And it's funny, you mentioned earlier about the kind of herbaceous character that's a hallmark of Carmenere. And actually, it's not very present, I don't think, in the 2014. And I'm wondering, is that something that, as the wine ages, that kind of that dissipates, and we're left with a more kind of spicy, leathery, softer kind of structure?
Yes, they don't normally. Those aromas age into when they're not green, because there's a difference between green and herbal. Normally, that character of the Carmenere moves towards spices like pepper, like almost lavender, that kind of, or bay leaves. It moves towards that type of aromas. And here there's a comment that they're loving this with goat cheese and salted crackers, beautiful soft tannins. The soft tannins is typical of Carmenere. Very, very characteristic to the grape variety.
Yeah, I think this is delicious. And you mentioned this would be really good with a barbecue, I think.
Well, here in Chile we're really good at having barbecues, and my family, my mother is from Argentina, so we have a background of asados, of barbecues, which is quite important. So yes, I would say this goes very good well with a good barbecue, ribs, roasted vegetables, like red pepper goes very good with Carmenere. In general, roasted vegetables with a good asado barbecue goes very well. They also say Carmener goes very well with a curry, and I tend to agree with all the spices and everything. They're a very good pair.
Great, but not too hot a curry. I would imagine, like too much chili. Like spice is great, but chili heat sometimes can be a bit of an enemy.
It blocks the flavors.
Yeah. But yeah, with barbecues, hopefully we'll be having lots of barbecues in Ireland, because we're able now since Monday to visit each other's gardens for the next little while. Yeah,
I got my vaccine today.
Did you?
I just like an hour ago I went to get my vaccine.
Congratulations! My wife got hers yesterday. Yeah.
Really?
We're all looking forward to it. Yeah. Hopefully we'll be able to travel again soon and be able to meet up and have tastings in person, which I'm really looking forward to.
Yes. So I'll move on to this is our vineyard in Apalta. This is really a good picture because these hills, the Piedmont that you see here, is it's the best for the growing of Carmener. The soils have a bit of clay, and that's good for retaining water. But it's good because it retains water and it goes giving it very slowly to the vine. So the vine a little bit struggles through the season. And it's good for ripeness and the development of flavors and bringing forward the picking date. So it's a very unique place within Colchagua where we're growing our grapes. And the last wine that we're going to taste comes from Alto Jahuel. Somebody asked about the lands, comes from this vineyard too. And the wine that we're going to taste is Gran Reserva Cabernet Sauvignon. This vineyard is located at the foot of the Andes. In this picture, you can slightly see the mountains in the background. This is a winery. And here we have two different types of soil, the alluvial soils and the colluvial soils. The alluvial soils are on the flat. And the most well-known Cabernet Sauvignons in Chile come from this alluvial terrace of the Maipo River. It's a very old alluvial variety, and the soils and the altitude being at the foot of the Andes is perfect. Very well-drained soils, but also we have noticed, and this is since the 90s where we started planting on the hillsides, that the hillside has very good soil and exposure for Cabernet Sauvignon, but it gives a very different character. So what we do, so that you understand, in this little map, you can see my arrow, I think. This is all the flat, the alluvial terrace, and these are all slopes with Cabernet Sauvignon planted on the colluvial soils. And these are components that are very reactive and like very bright, and the alluvial terrace is very sort of light and elegant. Gran Reserva Cabernet Sauvignon is a mixture between the alluvial terraces and the higher parts of the vineyard that are on the slopes. So we have a lot of diversity in terms of soils and altitude exposure, and this gives us a lot of different types of cabs, and we blend into this wine. And this is 2014, so it has had quite a bit of aging already, now 7 years, which is quite interesting for you to see, because this Cabernet Sauvignon is known for its aging potential. This is a very unique vineyard, because the best places for growing Cabernet Sauvignon are around Santiago, and a lot of the vineyards that were famous for their cabs have been eaten by the city. So having a vineyard of this dimension on these types of soil so close to the capital is very, very unique. So I have a question about 2014. 2014, it was a good year. It was a good year. I think it's a coincidence that they're both from this vintage. I know it. I don't know. I didn't pick the vintage, but I'm glad that really glad that you're tasting it. It was a warmer season and quite classic in style. So you're tasting a very classic year for Chile in terms of no events of rainfall or heat waves or etc. So yeah, very steady season.
It is a coincidence that they're both 2014, but I know with the Carmen Gran Reserva Cabernet Sauvignon, I've quite a few different vintages tucked away, going back as far as 2009. I have how many? 16 bottles of 2009 tucked away in the cellar. I have a little 2013. We have the 2014 that we're tasting now, some 2015 and some 2017. So if anybody wants to see the older style of 2009, I'm sort of keeping that reserve back just as a little sort of historical thing almost for myself. I tasted it recently and I absolutely love it. So Alexander, that might be something that you would like. If anybody would like to get a little 2009, drop me an email and I'll share it out between you. But as I say, I think there's 17 bottles. We had three 6-packs that we found in a cellar. And I tasted one, so I think we have 17 left, if my maths is correct.
So, what was I going to show you? Yes, and this is a picture of the vineyard Alto Jahuel from the slopes. So you can see very clearly here. That's all the alluvial terrace. And it's a very interesting terroir, but here we're sitting on a slope with facing north, so it gets quite a lot of sunlight and a very different character of wine. So for us, this is how we work in terms of designing our wines. Gran Reserva is like the general conception of Cabernet Sauvignon from our Alto Jahuel vineyard. Then we have the lands, for example, that you asked about, Paul, which is a blend from this vineyard. Then we have Vintages blend, which is a different wine, also Cabernet Sauvignon, but the difference is that we blend different vintages into one wine. And that is how we go creating like a portfolio of wines through terroir. So the place is what moves us, and the reason to be of each of the wines has to do with the site and the match with the grape variety, which seems very obvious, especially for Europe, because normally wine regions are related to grape varieties, but that is not the case for Chile. The viticulture map has been designed probably in the last 30 years, where this vineyard actually that today has 75% planted with Cabernet Sauvignon used to have grape varieties before. I'm talking 40 years ago: Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc, Pinot Noir, Carmener, you name it, everything in the same place. But today, the way of viticulture and the way of planting is more driven to the conditions of the site and matching it with the right grape varieties. So that's why the winemaker has to travel all over Chile trying to taste all the different grapes, and then we produce the grapes in the right places, and then we bring the fruit to the winery, which is down here. Planning on buying a helicopter.
Is that sustainable? A helicopter? No, maybe if you run it on biofuels. When I was down visiting you in 2019, I actually got the chance to go up in a helicopter and have a look at the vineyards of Maipo from a helicopter.
Lucky you.
I actually felt very, very blessed to be able to do that, because it was amazing to see that bird's eye view and the different, you can really see, as you showed on the map, the differences in altitude and aspect and soil types, and yeah, it was amazing.
I love the comment of Cleona about saying really great fresh ripeness. I love that concept and how to describe the wines that I like. There's this like trend of fresher wines, but ripeness is also important. So to get ripe, fresh fruit is the picking, like the point where we want to pick. So I'm glad you picked or you pointed that out in that way. I think the best Cabernet Sauvignon is on the floral side, the fresh, subtle, elegant tannin instead of like the big, ripe, heavy wines. I'm more towards like the fresh, ripe cab than the opulent, excessive Cabernet Sauvignon. So I'm glad to read that comment. Thank you.
I would agree. It is really beautifully balanced. The fruit is all there, but everything is so harmonious. The tannins, the tannic structure is quite different to the Carmenere. And when I first tasted it after the Carmenere, it felt bigger. But now that my palate has adjusted to it, I just think it's absolutely sublime. And the acidity and the freshness as well, as Clina said, is just really supporting the fruit there, which is not over the top at all. Sometimes, I suppose, in the past that there has been, I think there used to be an idea that the bigger something was, the more fruit, the more oak, the more tannin, the more of everything that you could extract from the grape, the better the wine was. Whereas now I think there is a change, and this is part of what I think that Carmen's almost tagline about reinventing the classics is about looking at that and seeing that, more is not always better, bigger is not better, but about balance and harmony. And I think this is where we're seeing Chile really coming into its own now. You spoke about the last 15 years, about how things have changed. And it'd be interesting to see your take on how things have changed in the last little while in Chile, because I think the wines coming from you and from other producers as well have more elegance and more finesse and are less heavy-handed, perhaps.
Yes, I think there's more respect towards the sites, to terroir, instead of imposing a style over the places. So it's really about searching for the identity and the best potential of the site without trying to extract so much out of it. And there's a question here about me spending some time in France when I was younger, when I was just starting in winemaking, and I think over there it has a lot to do with respect for the site. So there are a lot of differences. So the production in France is very classic, very traditional. I worked in Chateau Canon in Saint-Emilion, which is a Premier Grand Cru, so the classic of classic, like the definition of classic, and very traditional way of growing, and very respectful and very focused on the site, with a lot of experience. And I think for us, Carmen being such an old winery, we have a lot of that, especially in Maipo, where we were founded in Maipo, so we have a lot of experience. But I think one of the biggest differences is that in France, they are very focalized in their site, the specific site. You see growers of 5 hectares, 3 hectares, 20 hectares in average. So very local, small production. For us in Carmen, we are a little bit or a lot more expanded through the country. And I think that happens a lot in New World, where we work in many different regions at the same time, which is very interesting. But it's a big challenge too, because we have to be in many places at the same time. Luckily, we have a lot of differences in terms of climate, so we have a certain order to do things. But I would say that's one of the biggest differences. And also, we must say that in France, probably, I don't know for you if this is going to mean anything or not, but in terms of viticulture it is, but irrigation is a big, massive difference. France, most of the most well-known regions, you can't irrigate. In Chile, due to our climate where our viticulture is, we can't not irrigate. So irrigation, or the amount of water that falls in a season, how much and when, is what really defines the best seasons in France. For example, in Bordeaux, I'm going to talk about that, my experience there. You have very good years and not so good years. And I've read studies of how related it is to the rainfall, of how much and when. In Chile, we manage that factor, the factor of irrigation, which doesn't mean that that it's an easy thing and that everybody gets it right, and that I mean, what I want to say is that it's a very difficult factor to manage, but the advantage is that we are very consistent year after year. So we have the impact of a harvest, of a vintage, can be climatically, but the irrigation factor, the water supply, we manage it. So that makes us very consistent year after year. Okay. And also we have dry summers, except for this year that we had one event of rainfall, and we were like, we had rainfall in January. We are not used to that, but in other wine regions it's very, very normal. For us, the fact that we irrigate, it means we can manage in terms of quality, and depending on the objective of each block or parcel we're producing, for what we wanted and when we want to pick it, what style, etc. So I would say that's a very big difference. That's a very technical difference, but really relevant in my opinion.
But so that was your time in France, in Bordeaux, but you have worked not just in Chile and Bordeaux, but in New Zealand and California, and you've been around a bit.
Yeah, New Zealand and California, yeah. Those during harvest, but every year I try to, before COVID, every year I go to a wine region I go on a technical trip, which is always very, I don't know, how would you say in English? It's complicated to explain to the rest of the team that I'm actually working, because we get to see like these amazing wine regions, go and see the growers, drink amazing wines, great food, and blah, blah, blah. And you post a picture on Instagram and it's like, yeah, that's a great job. You go on holiday and you say you're working, etc. But to be honest, it's really important for us as wine makers to have this perspective of the world, of the different types of wine that we can make, especially in a country like Chile where we have so much diversity. It's very inspiring to see other wine regions, to taste other types of wine, and the fact, for Carmen, for example, I see in our portfolio the types of wine that we are able to create is very much inspired on things that I've seen in other places, linked to our own reality of our vineyards. So it's tough job. Somebody has to do it.
Okay, so that begs the question: have you been in Jerez?
Where?
Jerez?
No.
Where they make sherry? No, okay, because
no, Jerez. Jerez. Sorry, I didn't understand your Irish. No, your accent. Sorry, Jerez. No, I haven't. But we make a. We do a semillon with biological aging, like they do in Jerez. Not fortified though. And it's on my bucket list. I was actually going to go last year, and then COVID sort of came and spoiled the whole thing. But it's on the bucket list.
Oh, it's definitely a place worth visiting. I was there a few years ago with my wife, who actually doesn't like sherry very much, and we were at a tasting at a bodega, and I had lined up, I think, 6 different styles of sherry, and her tasting notes don't bear repeating. I was having to kick her under the table and telling her to shut up, and I was drinking her little coppers of sherry because she wasn't enjoying it. But I absolutely love it. But the reason I asked was obviously because the floor aged Semillon, the Florian that you make.
You thought I was inspired on that, but
well,
no,
I was just wondering where you got your inspiration from for that.
From drinking it, drinking sherry and wines from Jura. Okay. I love biological aged wines, and in Chile, Florian, the wine that we make, was the first wine with biological aging, and it's probably one of the most successful or accomplished wines for in Chile, because it's quite difficult to do biological aging if you don't. Like it, normally it happens because of a mistake. In our case, we wanted to do it, and we tried, and we did it because, and everybody asked me, why do you want to do that? Like, it's not commercially very successful because not a lot of people know about it, and but it's because we liked, with the team, we liked drinking that type of wine, so we said, why not? And it works really well. It works really well with the grape variety, with the type of wine. So we're happy.
Somebody's asking if you can explain. Explain biological aging.
Good question, because we keep on going on about it. But biological aging is age the wine under a veil of yeast, like a layer of yeast on top of for example, a low barrel. So a barrel of wine with wine in it, not completely full. So with the wine in contact with oxygen allows a layer of yeast to develop on top of the wine. And this yeast protects the wine, but also lives off the wine. So those yeast, they survive eating different components from the wine, like glycerine, volatile acidity, alcohol, any residual sugars that you might find in the wine, and it creates different aromas, very similar or like sherry type of aromas, and also it makes the mouth feel very lean, very salty. Like these wines are very with a very high salinity, fresh, dry as a bone, because these yeast eat absolutely everything off the wine. It's like doing like a liposuction to the wine, and it's very interesting, the flavors, the character that it develops. Yeah, that in very simple words, that's what biological aging is.
And you told me that with your Florian #3, you made 600 bottles. So it's a tiny, tiny production. And thankfully, we have got our hands on some. We just ordered some recently. Yeah.
For UK I was talking for Ireland?
For a little bit for the UK and a little bit for Ireland. We're able to split some. So some is going to Hedonism in London, and then BODEGA695 will get the rest. So
I can't even get hold of it.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to start stealing the bottles.
I'm so excited. I can't wait to get my hands on it.
Yeah, great.